So we, like the development of self, we all develop morality maybe a little differently. And I think you mentioned determinism, and I mean, there is the idea that if you don't develop morality, or if your morality is different from everybody else's, then you're going to end up in trouble, or you're going to end up not developing the way that you might like. But what is it? Good points, but I still don't know what it is.
Wrong and
Someone
right.
else.
Kind of like wrong and right. What is wrong and what's right?
Okay. Is that all there is to it? Jason, what do you think? That sounds good to me, but do you want to add anything? Morality is the idea, questions about what is the right thing to do, the right action, what is the wrong action. But there are no universal right and wrongs, and our sense of what is right and wrong changes developmentally and culturally. So in this culture, it is considered right or wrong to beat your wife. Anybody else? Okay. So we have consensus. I thought it was wrong. Okay. I use that example because actually one of the studies that they did with Colbert, and I don't remember if Colbert did the study, but they looked at a culture in India, which has many cultures, as you know. The Brahmin caste, and they were comparing values and morality, and in some cultures, such as this one in this study, which is a fairly dated study, it was right to beat your wife, for example. So there are certainly cultural differences, right? I was reading, I think in my paper yesterday, about do you think adolescents should be sentenced to life in prison? Apparently there are 100 adolescents sentenced to life in prison in the whole world. And guess where they all are?
The United States.
In the United States.
Isn't the Supreme Court?
So apparently
right now, right?
the rest of the world disagrees with our idea that that is morally appropriate. Okay, the Supreme Court is dealing with that question. That's what the article's about. But yeah, so there are cultural differences, there are developmental differences, but we're saying that there are, what we're talking about is the development of ideas about right and wrong. Sound good? Okay. So you all understood it, please? So what the Piaget said, Piaget's theory of moral development was actually a lot like his theory of cognitive development, a stage model. Morality develops gradually, and the individual begins with one kind of morality and then develops into another. We begin with the heteronomous morality, where we are dependent on external rules. Okay? So like, if you ask a young child why something is right or wrong, it may be because a parent told them it's right or wrong. External rules. Move toward a autonomous morality where the person applies his or her own internalized principles of right or wrong. So we get older, and we have more experience, and we have thought about it more, and we develop our own individual sense of what is right and wrong. So is morality, as Jason said, an individual thing, or a cultural thing? It's both. I think that was you who said that. Someone else was talking about the individual morality too. Yeah, made that up. So it is an individual thing, but it is also a group idea. As in the stages of cognitive development, Piaget regarded the gradual reduction of egocentricity in the child's thoughts. So we move from it's bad because it's going to hurt me if I get a spank, to a more, a less egocentric idea where we can develop empathy and think about right and wrong in terms of other people as well. So Piaget had developed 3 stages of moral development. First idea is moral realism, and as before, he associated ages with this, and as before, he's probably criticized for this. But he said basically that until around the age of 7 or 8, the child's judgment of morality reflects what is allowed and forbidden by adults. The child does not take into account the intentions which underlie the behavior. Empathy. So we're not yet understanding the other person's perspective. If I poke Brittany in the eye, that is wrong, not because it made Brittany cry, but because I got in trouble. All right? How many of you who are around young kids think that there's something to that? Me too. But I'm not sure it lasts until 7 or 8. I think it probably depends a lot on the child. So again, not hard and fast. The second stage is egalitarianism from about 8 to about 11. The child bases his or her judgment of an act being morally correct or incorrect on the fairest and most equal treatment of all participants. So here we move into more empathic stance. We're less egocentric. The child recognizes other people's needs and tries to take them into account when making moral judgments. Okay. So here what's right and wrong includes the idea that I made Brittany cry. So I can understand that she feels bad. And then equity from 11 onwards. And again, you could ask, are you about as morally able as you were when you were 11? So again, this might need some extension. The child's social understanding has become more sophisticated, and now the child understands that not everyone has the same needs. And basically, as Jason was talking about, things are more complex than right and wrong. Sometimes what's right for Sarah might not be right for Jason, and it just depends on the situation. And the child realizes that things are more complicated than that. Equal treatment is the ideal, but it doesn't apply equally to everybody. That basically morality is complicated. Like Piaget, Lawrence Kohlberg, who was born in 1920, lived until 1987, assumed underlying biologically determined cognitive stages, which present the frame for children's moral development. So a lot like Piaget, but his model was more sophisticated, a little more complex. Kohlberg said that the child progresses from a state in which moral judgments are solely based on the need to avoid punishment to a state where the individual applies universal ethical concepts. And it's, as I said, it's a lot more well-known model of moral development. There are some criticisms associated with it, and we'll talk about that. But sort of surprising more we weren't familiar with. Kohlberg's theory is based on longitudinal research. Kohlberg's moral dilemma. I'll give you an example on the next slide. You might have seen this before. Story of Hind. In Europe, a woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that the druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to make. That would never happen. He paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get together about $1,000, which is half of what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay it later. But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." So Heinz gets desperate and considers breaking into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife. Should Heinz do that? Should he break in and steal the drug? Is the question. And as I said, the more important question is, why do you think that? What is your reasoning? Is it Levenger's phase theory of ego development? And I think we'll just start looking at the phases. So Levenger had about 10 stages, I think. Some of them are similar to other stages we've looked at, like the first one, the impulsive stage. Basically, id-like, dependent on the external controls. Interactions are based on needs and impulses. So it sounds very much like the id sort of creature. Deep attachment with caregivers. Rules are poorly understood. So we're talking about basically babies to 3-4-year-olds. Basically, in terms of morality, good things are things that help get the needs met, and bad things are things that hurt us or don't get our needs met. So, simple sort of morality there. Next stage is the self-protective stage. Perceive the world through our wants. We lack long-term goals and ideals. So we're still early childhood here. Operate as opportunistic hedonists. Opportunistic hedonists. We know the rules and we like them because we can use them, we can bend them to our will. We can use them to our advantage. So we figured that out. Primarily selfish, blame others when they can't get in trouble, or blame parts of self that they can't control. What that means is, and one of the things I like about Levenger's approach is that it's basically people can be at any stage, even grown-ups can still be at this stage, and people can be well adjusted at every stage. And Levenger talks about the fact that there probably are many adults who are quite successful and are still at this stage, and a few politicians jump to my mind, and because think about this blaming others or blaming parts of self. And how often recently have we heard leaders, politicians, or other sorts of leaders get into trouble and say it was because of the power, the attention got to me, it wasn't in my control, or an addiction, or sex drive, or the pressures of the job. But people who are maybe operating at this stage and are sorry when they get caught, and then they blame something, even a part of themselves, but a part that they see is not under their control. Certainly, children do this as well.